Welcome into the Week 11 edition of the Consistently Cashin podcast here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. I'm Colby Conway at Colby R. Conway over on X. And back after their bye week last week is Ron Rigney. Since Ron, it's been a little bit since we talked, but I feel like the Colts have had 3 quarterback changes in the past week since we've last talked.
Yeah, and I'm not in favor of the one that they made just now. We talked about it Thursday night. I talked about Jonathan Taylor, how he's the consistency in that offense, and he's going to have to be because they're going back to Anthony Richardson. And I guess this is just kind of let's see what we have. We're going nowhere fast, and we'll see if this high draft capital investment that we made is going to pay off. But I don't know, man. We'll see what happens. But again, hats off to the Texans. They're getting it done. I thought they were going to pull that game out against the Lions the other night. Man, that defense looks solid, but I think there's great things on the horizon there in Houston, not so much in Indianapolis.
I'll give you some optimism, though. If you want to hear some positive talk about Anthony Richardson, make sure you check out the Prop It Like It's Hot podcast and articles. I do have a player prop this week that is on the positive side for
Okay.
Anthony Richardson. So make sure you check that out. And I will give one other quick shameless plug here. If you head over to Fantasy and Frames, I do fantasyandframes.com. I do a weekly article over there. And I actually talked about how Anthony Richardson is actually worth a roster spot right now on your fantasy teams, rather than having your QB2 or your backup being like a Jameis, a Derek Carr. Go pick up Anthony Richardson. If you don't start him, great, but he is better on your bench than someone else's starting lineup if he really pops off. And let me show you this. Of the teams that Anthony Richardson played, the games that he started with, some of the teams were Houston, Miami, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Houston twice actually. All of them rank at least in the bottom half of the league or the better half in terms of completion percentage allowed. Now, does facing Richardson in there maybe help a little bit? Maybe it boosted it for that game, but check this out. So far in the year, this does not include the Thursday night game of week 11. Houston, lowest completion percentage allowed. We've seen that against most quarterbacks that they played. Green Bay's 14th, Chicago's 5th, Pittsburgh is 7th, Miami's 8th. So I'm not saying that Richardson's only completing 44% of his passes because it's the teams he's facing, but I do think he's closer to the 59.5% guy that we saw last year than the 44% that he's put forth this year. So just a little bit of optimism there for Anthony Richardson and you Colts fans out there. So,
And one thing I want to add too is, if you do have him and you do have to start him, the guy is, he does have that athletic ability. He's that big play waiting to happen. And when you look at that week 1 against Houston, 9 completions out of 19 attempts doesn't look great, but when you look at what he did on those 9 completions, 212 yards and 2 scores, the guy can make it happen when he has the ability to make it happen. But it's just we got to get that completion percentage up, closer to that 60% range.
absolutely. Well, we'll just go ahead and put Anthony Richardson in our lineup then as our quarterback then based on all of that glowing remarks. I do think there's a path for it, though. I'll get into that a little bit
Yeah, agreed.
if you don't talk about him. But let's talk about the quarterback position. Obviously, you got Lamar Jackson, and up top you have the massive showdown in the 4:00 window of the Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes versus the refs game. We'll have to see kind of what breaks down there. So talk to me about the quarterback position. What are you thinking here?
I'm thinking we're not paying up this week. I'm thinking you're probably on the same page with me there. The only guy that when I first started getting interested in quarterbacks is when I got down to Jared Goff there against Jacksonville. But and you guys would have done, you guys did the same thing with the lineup that I would have done last week. You picked on Jacksonville with Minnesota. That didn't work out too well. So I don't know if that's props to the Jacksonville defense or Sam Darnold being bad. But Jared Goff, it's kind of like the Patrick Mahomes thing. They've been winning. But Jared Goff threw 5 picks last week. The week before that, he threw 3 touchdowns, which is great, but he only threw like 80 yards. So he hasn't been all that consistent. So I can see you making an argument for that. I kind of like Bo Nix there, but Atlanta, while they do allow a lot of fantasy points to the QB, they're not allowing a lot of fantasy points to the QB on the ground. So that made me kind of pivot off him a little bit. Again, not upset with it if you go with him, but the guy ended up settling on. I went down to about 5,500. I went with Aaron Rodgers against those Colts. He built that rapport with Garrett Wilson. He built that rapport with Devontae Adams. Plus, what I wanted to do with my wide receivers and my running backs, I needed that money, so I went ahead and went with Aaron Rodgers at 5,500.
Fair enough. I think there's a path to go with Aaron Rodgers. I think if you have the money, I think you try to get to Russell Wilson at 5,900. Ravens are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. I'm glad you mentioned Bo Nix because Atlanta has allowed the 6th most over the last 5 weeks, and I am actually going to bang the drum for Anthony Richardson. I'm scared to death of the Jets corners. I'm scared to death of the Jets defense, but believe it or not, over the last 4 weeks, Jets have allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, including the 2nd most rushing yards and a whopping 4 rushing touchdowns. And if you look for the year, the Jets, they've been okay against kind of runners on the ground. 5 touchdowns allowed total on the ground, 4 of which have come, like I said, they're in the last 4 weeks. And when you look too, it's not even like they faced prolific runners in the last 4 weeks. Kyler Murray, solid. But then it's CJ Stroud, Drake May, and Russell Wilson. Stroud had, I believe, 59 rushing yards in that game, and I'm pretty sure it's a career high for him. I think Drake had 40 some, and he only played like 8 snaps or something. You can run. You can run on the Jets. So I will bang the drum for Anthony Richardson down there at 5,300. I don't think you need to go any lower than that. There's nobody there that does it for me. I
Well,
do it with Mac Jones.
I was gonna say if
So
you're feeling crazy, Mac Jones at 4,900 against that Detroit defense. Just saying.
he has no run game. He'll have to throw it a ton, and I'm not inspired by that. And he had 8 points last week. There's just no, thank you. If you can do Mac Jones at 4,900, you can find $400 to get to Anthony Richardson, who I think in a game we can see Anthony Richardson. I'm not saying it's this game, but we've seen Anthony Richardson put up 30 fantasy points before. It'll take Mac Jones 4 games to get to 30 fantasy points. So I'm okay. But yes, I guess you could do it, but that's a what did Randy Jackson say on American Idol? That's a no for me, dog.
That's going to be a no for me, dog.
Yep, that's going to be a no for me, dog. So let's head over to the running back position. You kind of already tipped your cap here. It sounds like you have a champagne taste, but perhaps maybe on like a diet soda budget here at other positions. So let's hear the Ron Rigney playbook at running back.
It's kind of a mid-grade champagne taste, I guess. You got McCaffrey coming back against Seattle, solid matchup there, but he's already the top guy on the books here. Kyron Williams down a little bit. New England is not great against the run game as well. I believe they're in the bottom third in allowing fantasy points. So Kyron Williams is always in play with the amount of snaps he gets. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is interesting too, because it seems like Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy that's going to get more of the touches kind of down the stretch, with David Montgomery sprinkled in a little bit. For some reason, David Montgomery is a touchdown magnet, so I could see it making an argument there as well. I ended up settling down a little bit. I went with Kareem Hunt at 6,700 just because I think that the weeks we have to use Kareem Hunt at an affordable price are starting to dwindle. Isaiah Pacheco kind of creeping back in that picture, but he's out again this week, so I wanted to utilize that. And I don't know so much what I think about this Cleveland New Orleans game script. I don't think it's going to be basketball on grass by any means. So I went with Nick Chubb at $6,000 against a New Orleans defense that's pretty generous against the run as well. The only thing I don't like about that is if it starts to get into where they need to pass a little bit, you're going to see a little bit more Jerome Ford. So that kind of scared me a little bit. But I thought at that price point with that matchup, with what I needed as far as salary, Nick Chubb made a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So Kareem Hunt, you are exactly right. Pacheco is on the comeback. Sounds like probably next week. And this year, Buffalo's allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per game to running backs, and including the most receptions overall. And guess who just happened to have 10 targets last week? That is Mr. Kareem Hunt. Jacksonville has also been very generous to running back, so the Gibbs-Montgomery duo is obviously clearly in play. The Saints have actually allowed the 4th most on the year and the 6th most over the last 4 weeks. So Nick Chubb is in a good spot, but you hit the nail on the head. If, God forbid, they come out and hit 2 deep shots to Marquez Valdez-Scantling again, we get game scripted out of Chubb. And obviously here on DraftKings, it is a PPR scoring, so we just run into you're kind of between a rock and a hard place there, and you're not in a good spot regardless. Other than that, over the last 4 weeks, I think if you want to get a little bit, it's weird to say contrarian, but on this main slate, the team that has allowed the most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks is actually the Steelers, believe it or not. So I think you can make a case for Derrick Henry, just because I do think Pittsburgh's going to score as well in that game, should stay pretty close. But I think you said a lot of good things. There are a lot of guys that I like. I think you can go to Jonathan Taylor. People have been running all over Indy of late, so I think you can do that. I think you can also even do Ken Walker if you want to, and then obviously Devon Achan's always in play, especially on DraftKings. Vegas is not good against running backs, and Achan's just used at just an insane clip. We're now getting a steady rushing volume with him, and then the targets haven't faltered at all. So if you look at the last 3 weeks, we have a $7,200 running back who's had double-digit carries and at least 5 targets in the past 3 weeks, and he's at 7,200 with like 8 other running backs priced higher than him. So I think you can look to Devon Achane if you want to save a little bit of money at the running back position. If we go down a little bit further here, I don't think ETN's going to do much on the ground, but I do think Mac Jones is going to pepper him with targets. So like I wouldn't be surprised if ETN goes like 8 carries for 21 yards, but has 6 catches for 38 yards and gets you to about 12 fantasy points. Like I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Nick Chubb's a good value at 6K. And if you go down a little bit farther than that, is there even anybody down here that does anything for us?
No, there's not. I mean, the only, you mentioned Etienne. I mean, I love me some Audric Estime. I was looking at him in my flex spot. It makes a lot of sense. The workload is going up. I've been pounding that guy's drum all year preseason. So I do definitely like that. I did give him a look, but I just don't know that there's going to be enough volume there to justify it. But the price point is super, super affordable. So depending on what we do anywhere else, I would completely be 100% okay with that.
Fair enough. Let's head over to the wide receiver here. I have one play that stands above the rest. I will be curious if you mention him, and I will probably just tip my cap. And this is the guy that I'll probably choose to lock in. But let's hear the Ron Rigney playbook at wide receiver, and then I'll kind of give my thoughts of the position.
Again, went down a little bit. I think you got to look at George Pickens there in a nice matchup. You mentioned Russell Wilson against Baltimore. Baltimore's allowed passing yards early and often, but I went down a little bit further. I think Calvin Ridley's a little bit intriguing there. He's been solid last couple of weeks. Brian Thomas Jr. But I ended up, again, I do want to have a piece of that Jacksonville-Detroit game, so I went ahead and went with Amon-Ra St. Brown, went with Garrett Wilson to pair him with Aaron Rodgers, and then I paid down a little bit for Juwan Jennings, who comes in against Seattle at 5,300. No injury designation whatsoever. He was questionable all week. I think he's good to go. Opposite Debo, you got Ricky Pearsall there too, but I think Juwan Jennings is kind of that clear number 2 on the other side of Debo. So I went a little bit more expensive with a couple guys, and then I paid down a little bit for Jennings, who I think that volume is going to be there to outpace that $5,300 price tag.
Jennings is a good value if you need the money. I also love Khalil Shakir. I love love Calvin Ridley, so you don't have to convince me on him. I prefer Darnell Mooney to Drake London. If we go down a little bit more, I really like Courtland Sutton, though he's not my top play at this position. Juwan Jennings down there. I can't quit Cedric Tillman. He's used so much. He crushes man coverage. Saints play a lot of man coverage. So my guess is that we'll actually probably down in this price range use Tillman instead of Jennings. And the reason for that is because my play of the week is Debo Samuel. Here is why. There are a few things in life. There's death. There's taxes, and there's Debo Samuel against the Seattle Seahawks. Samuel was good last week when you look at him, 5 for 6 or 5 catches on 6 targets, 62 yards, 3 carries on the ground. But here is the thing. If you take a look here, where was his biggest fantasy output? Right here in week 6 against Seattle. It's like, okay. In 8 career games, including 1 playoff game against Seattle, Debo Samuel has at least 90 total yards in every single game. He has 100 or more receiving yards in 6 of those 8 games with 8 total touchdowns. And over the last 4 weeks, guess who ranks second in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers? It is the Seattle Seahawks. So Debo owns Seattle. Wide receivers own Seattle right now. Debo's my play of the week, so he's the one that I'll probably end up locking in. If you're paying up, I think Amon-Ra is your top option, and then Puka Nacua is number 2. Puka will outscore Cooper Kupp this week. He has a better matchup, and he is Stafford's guy against man coverage. So take a look at Nacua there. So that's what I'm doing at the wide receiver position. Let's head on over to tight end. What are we seeing here at this position, Ron?
So you look at the top there. I mean, just kind of like we talked about on the show Thursday night. I mean, there's not a ton at this point that you love at tight end, whether it's DFS or whether it's seasonal. Again, you've got George Kittle there. He's questionable, but he's going to play through it. Dalton Kincaid in a great matchup out. So maybe if you're looking to save a little bit of cash, Dawson Knox might be a guy that you look at. We might need him later on, depending on what we spend. I ended up settling on Jonnu Smith for $3,800 against Vegas. Vegas is right there, 3rd most points allowed to the tight end. And when you look at Jonnu Smith over the last 5-6 weeks, I mean, he's been one of the top guys at the position. Now, honestly, it doesn't take a whole lot to be one of the top guys there. But when you look at some of these stat lines, you got 5 for 62, you got 7 for 96 and a score. You got 4 for 20 there, which again, that's kind of the one clunker in here. 5 for 46, 3 for 45 last week. Again, Vegas not great against the tight end, but it seems like you mentioned Devin Achane. Now that they've been going to Devin Achane a little bit more and getting Jonnu Smith a little bit more involved, it seems like that offense is back going. Instead of trying to force it to those two guys on the outside, they're trying to get other people involved, and I think that's key for them. They looked pretty solid the other night when we saw them. So again, I think for the combination of matchup and price, I don't know if you're going to do much better than Jonnu Smith.
Vegas has allowed the most fantasy points per game to tight ends over the last 4 weeks. So you are absolutely right. Jonnu Smith is the guy I love down here. Way, way, way too cheap at 3,800. Here's the other thing. 3 for 45, but he was tackled on his long reception at the 2-yard line. If he gets those 2 more yards, he's at 3 for 47 with a touchdown, and we're talking a lot differently about Jonnu Smith heading into this week. So I am all aboard the Jonnu Smith train. I won't fault anybody for Taysom Hill. Bob and I were in on him last week, and he did have an 88-yard touchdown pass that was called back, or an 88-yard touchdown catch that was called back due to a penalty. So things could have looked a lot different there, which would have given Hill 14 plus in 3 of his last 4. But Jonnu Smith is absolutely a steal at 3,800. I'm not going to mess with like the Brock Wrights and the Sam Laporta fill-ins. I think it's all just going to go to the running backs and the studs that they have there. So, yep, for me, it's Jonnu Smith or bust at tight end. Let's just say this, though. If you were to pay up for one of the top 3 in Kelsey, Kittle, or Bowers, which is your preference?
It's got to be Kittle against Seattle. I mean, if I'm going to pay up, and Seahawks they're not terrible against tight ends, but I mean, him and Purdy have just been getting it done all season, and I think if you're going to, well, I guess the 8th most points allowed, so I guess they're not great against the tight end, but I feel like Kittle has been the one consistent guy. We that's what we talk about here. He's been the one consistent guy that I believe is almost matchup proof at this point with that offense. So again, I know you mentioned Debo. I think there's going to be enough to go around that Kittle's a decent play as well.
I would probably lean Kittle as well. So quick talk about the defense here. We do have Lions going up against Mac Jones. We got the Vikings going up against Will Levis. Where do you settle in at the defense, or is it just kind of wherever we have money for?
I went down to $3,000 and went with the Dolphins. Dolphins looked decent the other night against the Rams. You saw Calais Campbell coming on a little bit. You saw it just looks like they're starting to kind of figure stuff out and get going in the right direction. I liked what I saw from them the other night against Vegas, against Gardner Minshew, who's in their quarterback. I love me some Gardner Minshew, but again, that Raiders offense, there's not a whole lot there that they have to worry about. It's at home. The Vegas Raiders coming across the country, but I feel like at $3,000, again, kind of like Jonnu Smith, it's the best combination of price and matchup.
Dolphins are at a good spot, and if you are not as pro Anthony Richardson as Ron and I are, you could look at the Jets, because Richardson is, to be honest, probably good for an interception or 2. So you could look at Jets at 2,800. But all right, let's go ahead. Let's build a lineup here. So I've already said mine. The guy I'm locking in, no questions asked, is Deebo Samuel. That's my guy this week. Who is your one? No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I think my lock-in is going to be Kareem Hunt, because this could be the last week that we feel good about using him. So we might as well use it up against a good matchup.
All in there. Do you want to go ahead and do Jonnu at tight end? We were both excited about him.
I think we should. Yes, sir.
All right. And then let's look here. So we're going to have a little bit of change. Let's just go ahead and for now, let's put what was the defense? Dolphins. Put the Dolphins defense in. All right. So we're still pretty good money-wise. We can probably afford one more big piece. Do you want to do an Amon-Ra? Do you want to do like a Gibbs or an Achane? What do you think if you had to pick between kind of one of those 3?
I mean, we've got Jonnu in there, so if we feel okay about Achane, I love everything you said about Achane. And again, I think the volume is going to have to be there for them to win. I think he's clearly the guy ahead. You see Mostert and you see Wright peppered in a little bit. But the only thing I don't like about the Detroit running backs is I don't know which one I feel better about going with, because you get Gibbs, who's probably going to have a little bit more volume, but you get Montgomery, who might have the touchdown. I don't know. I do like Amon-Ra there. I just don't know, after I looked at it again, how I feel about that $8,000 price tag.
All right.
So
I mean, Pickens for now. Let's put Pickens.
All right.
You want to try Garrett Wilson too?
Yeah, because if we end up having to go with Rodgers, I like that stack. But even if we don't, I think it's 7,100 with what they could put up against Indy. I think that's solid.
All right, so I'll throw Rodgers in there for now. If need to, we can switch to Richardson and save some pennies. But all right, so about $5,000. So was there any? I mean, we could look at like Dawson Knox in the flex, because he's relatively cheap, and it's a great matchup against there. That would give us 66 for a running back, which puts us at like David Montgomery. We get down there, we're 6K away from Chubb, and that's about the lowest of the running back range that we felt comfortable with.
I mean, I don't feel terrible about Montgomery. Again, it's just kind of unpredictable which guy's going to be the guy that's going to get the touchdowns this week.
In theory, they could be Montgomery because they're going to play from ahead. They should be frequent flyers in that red zone area. So we could go, if we go Chubb, we'd have 6,000 that we could bump Knox up to. Abdullah, Hasty Williams, Tucker. Honestly, none of that is really that great. So actually, if we stuck with Knox, went Chubb, even getting the defense up to 600, that still puts us away from either attacking Mac Jones or Will Levis. So then we would have to drop Rodgers. We'd save 200 by going down to Richardson. That would bump us up to 38, which would actually let us get to the Lions going against Mac Jones. So it's just a matter of but then we have a naked Richardson basically it's basically, if we do it this way, it would come down to if we want the Rodgers and Dolphins or Richardson and the Lions/Vikings. I just feel weird like altering our lineup for the sake of a defense.
Right.
So if we have 700, we could get Pickens. Pickens gets up to Cooper Kupp. Wilson gets up to Cooper Kupp. We're still beneath Amon-Ra. We could get, Kareem Hunt's your guy, so we can't move off him. We could get Jonnu up to Tucker Kraft, but I still like Jonnu more. We might just swallow the $600. Oh, we could get Rodgers. We could get Rodgers up to Darnold, Tua, Russell Wilson. Because if we go,
I'd be okay with Russell Wilson stacking him with Pickens. I think that's all right.
Yeah. All right, let's do that. Let's switch Rodgers up to Russell Wilson. 200 left. We're not doing anything with that. So Russell Wilson, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Debo Samuel, George Pickens, Garrett Wilson, Jonnu Smith, Dawson Knox. #2 tight ends. Miami Dolphins defense. Thumbs up.
I think so. Yes, sir.
Thumbs up. Let's do it. So that'll be the Week 11 consistently cashing lineup. We're looking to get back in the clutch game department after a couple of down weeks. So enter this lineup into a double up 50-50. Let's see if we can get a clutch game on the books. Ron, let everyone know where they can find you and what work you got here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports.
Ron Rigney on the X Machine over Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Had the waiver wire article for you this week. Check out the Thursday Night Consistency Show with myself and Mr. Bob Long. And I always forget to plug this too. America's favorite segment, the random football card of the week too. I had a nice little Randy Moss card on there, so make sure you tune in and check that out. But all the good stuff over at BigGuyFantasySports.com. You guys got the prop bets coming out later, all the articles, all the shows. Go over there and check everything out and get that consistency goodness for the holidays at BigGuyFantasySports.com.
Absolutely. You can find me over on X at Colby R. Conway. A lot of good stuff here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports with the weekly Who's Hot, Who's Not article, consistently cashing podcast, and the Prop It Like It's Hot podcast and article. So make sure you check that out. Give everyone a follow here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Check it out. Sign up for a subscription today. Win your money back for the rest of the season. Fingers crossed with some good luck and prop bets and daily fantasy sports lineup. So best of luck in Week 11. We will see you next week for Week 12. And as always, stay consistent.